Good afternoon, distinguished guests. I am Rorisang Matlala, and I will be facilitating today's event. Now, our event is divided into two segments. The first segment being the human rights discourse, and the second segment being the 50th anniversary of the UKZN Law Clinic. Right? Now, it is with immense pleasure that I extend a heartfelt welcome to each and every one of you gathered here today. Our agenda today, like I've said, is divided into two distinct segments. Now, we are starting first with the human rights dialogue that is themed tackling and surmounting unfinished business in South Africa, democracy, the problem of socio-economic injustices, 30 years into democracy, right? Now, following this discussion, like I have said, we will transition into celebrating the remarkable 50 years journey of the UKZN Law Clinic. What you need to know is that it has been 5 decades ever since it has been created. The Law Clinic is situated here at the Howard College campus, and it has been a forefront of advocating for human rights. Through the provision of pro bono legal services and an unwavering support for vulnerable communities, the Law Clinic has made a long-lasting impact on the pursuit of justice and equality. Thank you once more for gracing us with your presence today, and I trust that today's deliberations will be both enlightening and enriching. It is therefore an honor to hand over the torch to the head of the School of Law, Professor Michael Keat, to come and officially welcome us to this event. Thank you, Prof.
Thanks very much, Rorisang. That wasn't on my script. I'm delighted to welcome you all to this event and to Howard College School of Law. We have some really great speakers for you, and I think it's really a milestone to be able to recognize the 50th anniversary of the clinic. One often thinks of 50 years as being a really, really long time, and it is a really long time, but I'm kind of thinking 50 years, 1974, how old was I? Once again, welcome all of you, and I hope that you find the event stimulating and rewarding. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Now, we're going to now start with the human rights dialogue. Before we do that, let me first start by, taking you through the vision behind this event. This event provides a platform for a meaningful dialogue, introspection, and collaboration amongst distinguished members of the panel, right, including Professor McQuaid Mason, Ms. Naomi that will be joining us online, and Mr. Mkize, right? These are, phenomenal people with, expertise that come from diverse realms, including legal practice, academia, activism, management, and other leadership roles, right? Thereby, with this expertise, they are here to enhance our deliberation by striking a chord with our audience, right? So by exploring these core themes, we aim to engage with our, our audience, right? And to also influence the direction of human rights, and socio-economic progress that has been made so far in our nation. So allow me to firstly start by underscoring or highlighting the paradoxical nature of South Africa's present circumstances, right? Now, despite the nation's pride in its commitment to upholding constitutional values or democratic values, and in its democratically elected government, what we see when we look at the current state of affairs, we can see that there is a misalignment between the democratic ideals and the lived experiences of people in our nation, right? And this calls for a deeper investigation into the complex factors shaping these results. So, I believe it's therefore safe to conclude that if the use of political power leads to the division and the alienation amongst members of a nation, and the worsening of socio-economic inequalities and things such as poverty and social exclusion, then the path of democratic governance may be misled and vulnerable to manipulation, or worse, the path to democratic governance may be hijacked, or should I rather say captured, right? So discussions surrounding these pivotal matters have endured for decades. It doesn't start with this discussion today, that's what I'm telling you. They have been there for decades, right? With scholars and policy makers presenting countless viewpoints on how to address the multifaceted problems that South Africa faces. While our discussion today does not resolve, or the aim is not really to resolve or put this debate to, do away with it. However, we aim to strengthen them by offering critical insights into specific issues, such as proposing strategies to prevent and overcome many avoidable internal conflicts and human rights violations troubling the nation. With that being said, I am going to now open the floor to Prof. McQuitt-Mason, who will tell us about the efforts that institutions such as the university and scholars have made over the few years to promote democracy. Prof, thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm sitting here because I don't want to be up there somewhere. I want us to try and see, we've got to come down to grassroots level. And context is important for everything that we do. And unless we examine where we come from and where we're going to, we can't just work in a vacuum. And what I'm going to do is talk briefly about how academics, particularly how the university here, former University of Natal and later Westville, have contributed to the struggle to bring democracy to this country, and also to talk about what have we been doing since democracy to try and make justice available to everybody. So we're not up in the stratosphere where very often we think the politicians are. They also need to come down to earth and to experience the reality of life. So I'm going to do this by looking at the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and up to the 2000, and what we're actually doing today. 1950s, not so much in the law school, but in the University of Natal, Alan Paton, who you've all heard of, wrote about Cry the Beloved Country, and he already was starting to do this. In the 1960s, we had very strong leadership in the law faculty. We had Professor Matthews, who was writing about law and liberty. He was writing about the darker reaches of government. As an academic, he was doing fantastic work dealing with aspects of social justice. There was also Professor Ronald Albino, who was a psychologist, and together they wrote about the effect of detention without trial on people as well. In the 1970s, Professor Matthews was joined by Professor Baron van Niekerk, who was a very good academic, but also enjoyed getting his hands dirty, so he would go to a National Party rally where all the government officials were and said, which of you guys were responsible for giving the order to kill that detainee or that detainee? He would talk about lawyers being obsessed with clinking cash registers, and not actually dealing with human rights issues, and he established the Society for the Abolition of the Death Penalty in South Africa. So again, there was a strong sort of mix in the early 70s, and I came into that one, so I had these other peers with me to inspire me. And Professor Matthews got me appointed as a conference secretary for the first International Legal Aid Conference in South Africa. And as conference secretary, I learned for the first time about law clinics. So when the conference ended in July, that August I went to Prof. Matthews and said, I want to start a legal aid clinic. He said, okay, if it doesn't cost money, go ahead. So I did it without costing any money. I was lecturing 5 different topics in the LLB, but I was still able to use my office as a base. I used to meet with the students on Friday afternoons and Saturday mornings. We'd go down to the Methodist Hall. We'd take mobile filing cabinets with us. But we had 2 opposition forces I had to deal with. The first was the apartheid security police, thought this was some subversive communist plot. And I had to keep saying, look, we're simply helping people apply the laws which this government is passing. Then I had opposition from the Law Society. These students are not going to be properly supervised. I said, that's okay. You guys come and join, and I'll talk about it later, but you come and join the management committee, and you can help us with supervision. So we managed to overcome those problems. And then eventually I edited the proceedings as legal aid in South Africa, and that really laid the blueprint for the clinical law movement in South Africa. In the 1980s, we had a whole lot of student protests and things going on. We had never-ending states of emergency, but at the same time, there was scope to move. I also had to deal with the apartheid legislation because 1983, I became dean. And the misnamed Extension of Universities Act passed by the apartheid government actually forced black people to go to their ethnic university and not to be able to go to a white university unless they could show in the program that they wanted to take, the course they wanted was not offered at their black university. So for me, that was an easy solution. I invented courses which weren't available in the black universities. And so out of that, we got Sandile Ngobo, who became our first Chief Justice, Mahweng, who was a Chief Justice, and now Ray Zondo. And so they all were able to come get permits using these courses. I had courses in invasion of privacy and advanced consumer law and stuff which the other universities didn't offer. So you're able, and this is a lesson you can always learn, you can use the system against itself to undermine it. So we did that in the 1980s. I also introduced the street law program, which you've all heard about. And again, there was a worry there. Is this a communist plot? Are you making... And the person who had to sign off on the grant, because we got a grant from the Attorney's Fidelity Fund, was Kubi Kutsi, the Minister of Justice. He had to sign and say this would promote the legal profession. And we managed to see, he said, if he can get a senior counsel opinion on that, he would grant the money. So I managed to persuade a senior counsel to do it. We got it. And he signed off on us to do street law. We did the first pilot project here. It was so successful that it was then transmitted all around the country. And I'd got one of my ex-students, Mandla Mkunu, to come and run the street law program. We did it in 6 schools, 2 African schools, 2 Indian schools, and so 2 white schools and an Indian school. And Mandla, very articulate young man who'd also got an LLM from Bristol, was the first time that white kids in a white school had seen a very articulate black guy teaching them. And it was fantastic. The first street law workshop I did in 1985 was a real eye-opener, because I managed to get a an organization of school teachers to invite black, white, colored, and Indian teachers to come to a workshop on street law, each bring 3 students. And it was interactive. And the first question I put to everybody was, who's ever been arrested by the police? All the black kids' hands had gone up because we had states of emergency then. Not a single white kid. So I gave them a scenario about a man walking down the street with a box of second-hand clothes, being stopped by the police. And I said to one of the white kids, come out here and come and arrest this person the way you think the police arrest someone. And the white kid, a girl from one of the high schools, comes out and says, excuse me, sir, I'm arresting you. And the black kids all laughed. I said, okay, come out here and show them how people really get arrested. And the black kid started pretending to beat the other kid, swearing at the other kid, and so on. And then we could talk about what were the powers of the police, what were the rights of citizens. And then we did a whole thing on the case of the shipwrecked sailors, famous jurisprudential case you might have heard about, where 3 sailors are shipwrecked, middle of nowhere. One of them's a doctor, says we can live for 30 days without food. After that, the only way we'll survive is if somebody dies and we eat him. And one of them, another one, there's a navigator, says we 1,600 kilometers from anywhere, no ships come here, we're never going to be rescued. The 25th day, the cabin boy, he's now feeling weak, so he says, why don't we toss a coin, and the person who loses, we kill and eat him, so at least 2 of us will survive. So the kids loved the story, of course, as well, so I told the story. Anyway, so they kill the cabin boy. He says, no, you can't do this to me, it's not fair. You know, I don't want to be killed. They said, it is fair, we all had an equal chance. Bad luck, they kill him. Miracle happens on the 5th day, 30th day, they're actually rescued. This is a real case in Queen Victoria's time. They're rescued. They've now got this conscience about eating the cabin boys. They confess to the captain. He goes back to England. They charge with murder. So we've got the kids now to argue, case for each side. And then at one stage, we then got into law and morality, because it was this, who was immoral here? The immoral person was the cabin boy, because just because he lost, he wanted now not to obey the rules. And then one of the white girls put up her hands, and it's from a private school. Prof, why are we criticizing these laws? Our parents voted for them. And the black kids, hands all went up and said, but our parents don't have a vote. And the white kid went like this because they'd been brought up in that narrow part. So what we were trying to do was to break down those barriers so people could see each other. And we had the space to do it as long as you came across as a supposedly neutral program. So that was one of the things that we did in the 80s. We also had a whole lot of NGOs. We set up the Centre for Socio-Legal Studies, the Community Law Centre. A whole lot of centres were set up. I also managed to get a student who was out on holiday from England to write up what had happened with law clinics since that 1973 conference. And we produced a little book on that. We included some student practice rules in that book, but the book also included some observations from the students in the courts about how many people were going to court without being represented. And it showed in the district magistrates' courts, 90% were unrepresented. So I then invited Judge Milne, who was the judge president, to come and open a conference for us on legal aid, where we were going to report on this. And I got him to read this in advance. And he then saw for the first time, it brought him down to earth. People were not being represented. So he introduced one of the early judgments saying that there's a duty on the magistrates to inform people about their rights and to tell them where they can get help. And that was followed up in Goldstone's case as well. I think Khadebi's case. And then later, that case about we have the right to legal representation and the right to be told where we can get legal aid as well. That was taken further by Judge Didcot, and eventually it's been interpreted for our constitution as well. You had Kanyili's case and so on. So all of those were things that we could do by making the judges aware of the context within which they're operating and bring them away from the sort of high court level. Also in 1985, the government had passed a law about small claims courts. So I offered to set up a training program for small claims commissioners, which we did in 1985, and trained all the small claims commissioners for the first courts. We also ran ADR, alternate dispute resolution programs, and we did a number of things to try and promote the availability of social justice to people at the ground. And then we started moving towards 1990, 1989. I got a call from Nelson Mandela's assistant to say that he would like his son to come to our law school. Would I admit him? I said if he had the qualifications, of course I'd admit him. So he was able to join us. And that was really great, because we know a year later he was actually, Mandela was released. But prior to that, in 1989, I'd gone with an ANC delegation to Harare to go and debate the 1988 proposed Bill of Rights by the ANC. Had drawn it up by the legal advisors. It was the second one. I don't know if you guys remember, Van Slabbert led in 90, way back, a delegation to Dakar in Senegal to try and introduce the Afrikaner to the ANC, to try and start getting talks going. I went on the second delegation with Van Slabbert and the Afrikaner deans to Harare. And that was interesting, because at the end of the first day, we had all these deans from the conservative Afrikaans schools. And at the end of the first day, one guy stands up and says, I can't handle this. These guys are all bloody communists. They're calling everybody comrade. So I said, Henny, relax. I've run 12 comrades marathons. Doesn't make me a communist. Anyway, on the Saturday after that, we were in Thabo Mbeki's room having some drinks to celebrate, and the same guy, I'll call him Henny, says, guys, this has been the most fantastic week of my life. When I came here, I thought you guys had horns and tails and you were communists. I realize you are South Africans just like us. You like good South African wine, you like going to braais, you're just ordinary people. I don't know the words to Nkosi Sikeleli, but will you please sing Nkosi Sikeleli for me? So they sang it, and immediately Thabo Mbeki and the other guys started singing Afrikaans songs, Daar kom die Alabama, and all these sort of Afrikaans songs. So everybody was just one big happy family. But we had such a good party that we were 2 hours late for the daughter of the ANC's ambassador in Harare's wedding. So I said to everyone, look, people are waiting for us, we better go. Why don't we toy for them? So I had showed all these Afrikaner deans how to toy. So we all sort of toyed in to this wedding, and of course everybody relaxed. But that again is part of nation building and what we're trying to do. And unfinished business somebody's going to talk about, but we need to continue the nation building efforts. And academics need to come out of their ivory towers and get down to grassroots level as well. So 1990s, Mandela was released. I got the old prison wall painted with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Had to do a big negotiation there because although we had a liberal mayor, Margaret Winter, she was happy for us to paint the wall. The wall was actually owned at least out to the prison or military prison authorities. And they said, she says, if you get their permission, fine. And they phoned the prison guys, and the prison guy says, no, sorry, you can't do it. So I said, give me the number of the guy. So I phoned a Colonel Verwoes, I don't know if he's still alive. And I say, hello, Colonel, I'm hearing something I don't believe. I hear that the military are opposed to human rights. What do you mean, Professor? We're not opposed to human rights. I said, well, I wanted to paint the wall of the old prison with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Oh, the Universal Declaration, no, that is different. I said, it's not different, it's human rights. And I told him this is true because I told a friend in America that I was going to do this. I said, look, I've got an American friend who's a big film director. He made a film on Martin Luther King, and I told him we were going to do this because he showed we've got democracy in South Africa. If you guys don't let us paint this wall, what are they going to say about democracy in South Africa? Oh, all right, let me get hold of the generals in Pretoria. So 2 hours later, I get a call. Professor, I've got good news for you. You can paint the wall, and we will arrange a brass band for the opening. I said, no, we don't need, we don't want a brass. Anyway, we painted the wall. The wall was painted. It has since been defaced and painted white, but I'm now reviving that. I've got a committee with Pansy Museum, and we're now going to try and get the thing done again. So again, unfinished business, which my colleague will be talking about. And the other thing was the truth and running out of time. Thanks, Narissa. All right, I was going to talk about going to the TRC. I went to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I apologized to them. I'd written to all the deans and said, why didn't you guys do anything about human rights and democracy? No, we couldn't. It was too difficult. We would get expelled. And then I shared with them what I'd done and so on as well. And then I also got involved, became president of the Commonwealth Law Teachers Association, got involved with the Global Alliance for Justice Education. And then really what we've done here has just expanded. Street law has been to 45 countries. The law clinic experience has been now to 60 countries, and I've advised many of those 60 countries on how to do it, following our simple example of how you're able to start simply. Even if you haven't got a lot of money, you can still do things. 2000, we merged, sorry, I'm going a little bit, we merged with UDW. UDW had always had student activists. They had produced also activists, Judge Zak Yaqub and others who all come from UDW. So they got merged with us in 2006. And then I just got involved. I got put on the Health Professions Council, Medical Ethics and Human Rights Committee. We then also picked up a couple of honorary doctorates. But the reason I'm wearing this shirt today is because I can't end without just making a footnote about Palestine. Because what they're going through now is really horrendous, even compared with what we went through. And I went in 2014 to go and introduce street law in Palestine. And to me, it was quite a horrendous experience because they had in the West Bank, they had separate roads for Palestinians and Israelis. I went to Hebron, where Abraham from the Bible and Sarah and Isaac and all of them are buried in a church and a mosque there. And we went to the market, which was right next to the where the mosque is. And as we walked towards the market, I noticed all the shops were closed, and there was very fine netting over the walkway. And I said, well, why have you got the netting up there? Is that shade cloth? They said, no. I looked next door, there was a high-rise building. There were 500 Israeli illegal settlers there. And they used to pour chamber pots of urine and faces over the Palestinians as they walked to the market. I just couldn't believe that. And then we went to the one end of the market. We wanted to go across another 30 meters to the other side. And we could go because we were foreigners. The Palestinians were not allowed to. That was reserved again for those settlers. They had to go 1.5 kilometers round to get to that 30 meters. So that really was for us a horrendous feeling. And then I met a lady who had a permit to work in Israel from the Palestinian area. And she said one morning she went through and she was taking some honey to work. And the security guy searched her, said, "What is this? This is honey." She opened the honey, security guard, and poured it all over the woman, all over her hair, her clothes. So, you know, you hear, I don't for a moment condone what Hamas did. I understand what they did. They killed people, and the guy actually said when he was asked by Al Jazeera, "Didn't you know you were going to kill civilians?" He said, "We're not interested in civilians. That is the United Nations job. We're here to liberate Palestine." So they don't worry also about their civilian population. They say if you're not free, it's not worth living. It's better to die for freedom than not to live. So I don't hold truck with them. But likewise, what the Israeli Defense Force are doing is completely unacceptable now. Over 30,000 people killed, whatever. Okay, 1,300 Israelis were killed, but you've got 30,000 now. And we've really got to get some sort of negotiated settlement there. Anyway, I wore this shirt because I wore that in Palestine. I think I've exceeded my time by far. Sorry, guys. Sorry for all the war stories. Thank you very much. If it was street law, I'd now be doing question and answer. That's why you didn't want to sit in the front row. But okay, thanks very much. Good luck.
Thank you very much, Prof. So I would also like to inform the members of the audience that we will have a question and answer session where you will, be given a chance to engage with the issues that are raised by each speaker, right? So, Prof, adding into what you have said, we were speaking just before we came into this venue, and now that, you told them that you were that in Palestine, I sort of feel the need to explain, because you explained to me your passion, why you are so passionate in the module of street law. So we were having a conversation with Prof, and he mentioned that, because I was telling him that, why is it that as academics we, own and we create this, large body of research where we research these things, and it ends up on the internet being read by our peers, some information that normally is read by, if you're lucky, judges, but normally it's something that, only exists in the academic arena. Then Prof said, I love street law because that's where we bring these laws and, these findings to the members of the community. So we sort of breach that gap, because over the years, without modules like street law, we will have instances where academics and scholars are just, doing research, and it's just there piling dust, collecting dust on the shelves. And we end up, using it to get promotions and things like that. But now, what is the core purpose of us going and looking at these topical issues? Isn't it to bring change? So I was interested, and fascinated by your initiatives to even take street law outside of South Africa. And you also said something within, when you said that your first workshop of street law where you brought white kids and black kids together, we could see that although these two groups had the same laws that were, being drafted and written when it comes to matters of arrest, you could see that, despite the same laws, they experience the implementations of those laws differently. They have different perspectives. because you also said that white kids would say, "Excuse me, may I arrest you, please?" Where else when it came to the black kids, they were, it shows that even though we have the same laws, our experience as to how these laws are implemented, differ. So with that being said, we have the next speaker, Ms. Naomi Webster. She's joining us online, and she's going to focus on human right matters, and she's also going to tell us about her experience and possible solutions that she has in mind. Ms. Naomi, I open the floor to you. Thank you. She's muted. Please unmute yourself. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we still cannot hear you. It was working perfectly.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. It is such an honor for me to be part of today's session. I must say that I'm saddened, particularly because the University of KZN is my home, not only home university, but it's also my home town. And so it saddens me that I'm not there physically. And what also saddens me is that when I was a law student back in the day at the university, Prof spoke about street law. And one of the fascinating courses that I got to do was to do the street law course in I think it was my second year at varsity. So it's such a surreal moment to be sharing a platform with my professor. And it was one of the highlights for me that I really, really hoped to be there physically, but I'm not there. And yeah, it's good that at least I am back, and I'm the student that returned to come and talk about socioeconomic rights and how far we've advanced as a country. And I'm talking about it and having this conversation with somebody that I admired my entire career. So it really is a wonderful opportunity that the university has afforded me. So I wanted to talk, and when Rory Sang spoke about this is going to be a conversation, it made me feel that it must be a conversation where I'm posing 3 questions. So I've structured my presentation in the form of 3 questions. The first question is, what is the lens that we use to understand the developments that have taken place in our country in as far as socioeconomic rights over the past 30 years? And I'm proposing that we should use a gendered lens to look at the question. The second part is to ask the question of who is the state? And in understanding who is the state, I also want to then ask the question as to what has the state's progress been in as far as socioeconomic rights, particularly for vulnerable people and particularly for Black women. And then lastly, a question that is left unanswered. So I believe that the session is providing us with a moment to have a conversation, and it's a conversation that we will continue, but it's not for me, an opportunity to provide as definitive an answer to the question of, has there been progress? Has the state utilized its resources to ensure that the constitutional promise becomes a reality for many people in our country? So I wanted to firstly start off by just sharing an experience. So in 2003, I had the opportunity to work for the South African Medical Research Council. And one of the major research projects that we did was a research project that looked at the health sector response to gender-based violence. So this research, and the title of the research is Other Patients Are Really in Need of Medical Attention, the Quality of Health Services for Rape Survivors in South Africa. It was significant not only because of the findings and the recommendations that came from the study, but also because it was recognized by the World Health Organization in terms of the research methodology that was used to measure the progress in regard to the attainment of the right to access health, adequate health. And for many of you, and I'm sure those who have embarked on research projects, you'll know that there's a research engine. So there's a website which is called ResearchGate. And ResearchGate is where, when you've published a research report, you then receive notification on the number of times that your research report has been cited. Now, this particular research report has been cited since 2003, over 69 times. Now, why is it significant? It's significant for me because every single time somebody references that report, the email notification is received by myself, and it's a reminder to me, and it allows me to actually think about what is the current state in as far as rape survivors in our country, and what is the state of the health sector in its response to rape survivors. So asking the question then from a socioeconomic rights perspective, what is the right to adequate health services meant for women who access health services when they are at their most vulnerable state, when they have been violated. So I think the key finding from that research was around the service delivery points in our country and how those service delivery points are able to actually enable or disable the attainment of constitutional rights. So when I make reference to this, I think it's also because, you know, as a Black woman, you share the experience of other Black women in this country. And when we speak about how far has government gone to attain socioeconomic rights, as a Black woman, I want to use that perspective to say that we must have the conversation about socioeconomic rights from a gendered perspective. And we must have that conversation because the engendering of socioeconomic rights basically means that the power relations in which rights are exercised are the way in which the feasible options that are open to women, at the same time, are those options open in such a way that allows for the interdependency of rights, and how do we then look at the role of the state in providing those rights, but providing those rights from a care perspective. And I wanted to come back to this question about the gendered nature of how we look at socioeconomic rights 30 years into our constitutional democracy, because the reality is that Black women in society are dying under the unholy trilogy of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. A recent research paper that was produced by the University of the Witwatersrand actually showed the extent to which the intersectionality between poverty and unemployment for Black women has made life so much more worse 30 years into our democracy. And when I quote again from Professor Sandy Liebenberg, when she published a research report, and this is back in 1997, and she said that there is an integral relationship between equality and socioeconomic rights. And when we consider this, we also then look at what are some of the founding values of our Constitution, particularly on the issue of human dignity, equality, and freedom. And so when we consider the progress made in the 30 years, we then have to ask ourselves the question, what do the institutions like culture and tradition, what do they do to either enable or disable the attainment of socioeconomic rights for Black women in our country? Now, when we look, and I want to move to this question around, so who's responsible ultimately for ensuring that socioeconomic rights become a reality in our country? And I want to then look at the way in which the Constitution has defined that responsibility. So firstly, looking at it from the perspective of the rights framework. So what are the rights? And then secondly, looking at it from the perspective of the rights holder. And then thirdly, the duty bearer. So understanding socioeconomic rights, our Constitution provides the foundation within which we need to understand it. So we must understand it from the founding provisions of the Constitution. And so we understand that the right to healthcare, to food, to water, social security, and education must be provided, but it must be provided and framed within the lens of dignity. And essentially, what does dignity mean for vulnerable people, for Black women in our society? I think also then the question is, just in terms of when we talk about these rights, and part of our discussion today is also to look at how can we be more inclusive. How can we ensure that our society is more inclusive in terms of accessing the constitutional promises? And the case of Khoza versus the Minister of Social Development provided an explanation of what is the word, the terminology in terms of the right, specifically everybody. So what do we mean when we say that everybody has socioeconomic rights? And so the court was clear to say that socioeconomic rights for everybody also means permanent residence in our country. Now, the question of the duty bearer, so who's the duty bearer? And when you read the Constitution, it's clear. It says that the state has a duty. And I want to then just read the specific sections in section 25, 6, 7, and 29, which states that the state must take reasonable legislative and other measures. And then section 29.2, which says the state must consider all reasonable educational alternatives. So the question of the distinction between the state and the government, and for me, it's something that I think we must be able to have that clear understanding of when we talk about the state, who are we talking about? When we talk about government, who are we talking about? So when we want to ask the question, what has been the state's progress over the past 30 years in as far as socioeconomic rights, we must understand then what is the definition in terms of the state. And so when we look at the concept of the state and the government, it's often used interchangeably. And so for us, and my understanding that the state is independent and it's sovereign, and that government then exercises the administrative function of the state. And so when we understand government, we then look in terms of Chapter 3 of the Constitution. And so the government, in the way in which it is defined, is the government at the 3 different spheres, and then the government in as far as the 3 different branches. So starting then to ask ourselves the question, so what is national, provincial, and local government done in the past 30 years to ensure that socioeconomic rights are a reality? These rights of access for Black women in particular, what has government then done in regard to this? And I want to suggest some examples to illustrate both the good and the bad, the positive and the negative in terms of what has government done. So then just looking specifically in terms of, again, now the social goods that the state must provide in as far as socioeconomic rights. And so when we look at the question of the different branches, so we're asking the question around how has the Constitutional Court dealt with socioeconomic rights, from Grootboom to the Treatment Action Campaign to Subramani to Mazibuko and Khoza. And these are the metrics that we should use when we answer the question of the unfinished business of socioeconomic rights in our country. So has the Constitutional Court, in terms of its decisions, been an enabler or disabler? And I think when we look at some of the current situations that we find ourselves in the country, so we look at the extent to which the Subramani judgment has actually managed to find its way in terms of legislation that has been put forward. So looking specifically at the national health insurance and the national health insurance in terms of the vision for that. So that's one of the achievements that we can claim, to say that from a rights perspective and from legislation, this is legislation that has been put forward, perhaps also looking at some of the limitations that the Subramani judgment then had for us as a country. Now, also when we consider not only, from a legislative perspective, but looking at the policy frameworks that government has put in place. So starting firstly with the National Development Plan, which was released in 2013. And one of the two, out of the 14 goals, one of the first two outcomes of the NDP, which deals with socioeconomic rights, is the right to quality basic education and long and healthy life. And I think that it's instrumental in a sense that it is a demonstration of a government wanting to look at not only the provisions of the Constitution, but also correcting the wrongs that apartheid has then done to our society. And so the NDP then is the marker that we are aspiring towards in the next by 2030, to say that we want to have a country where women are able to access health services, and they are able to access social security, and the accessing must not then be limited by the way in which our society, in terms of the patriarchal nature of our society, doesn't enable a woman to then have that a free access that is also founded on their sense of human dignity. Now, when we then, and I wanted to then move just very quickly to the question of what is the assessment? So what are the matrix that we use in terms of measuring, because, socioeconomic rights in terms of the spectrum of socioeconomic rights is wide. So when we look at the individual rights, are we then able to define what is the standard and the metrics that we want to use to determine this question of progress over the 30 years? And so when we consider some of the work that the executive, so the executive in terms of government, has done over 30 years. And I want to start with the foundation of the International Covenant of Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. How long did it take us as a country to ratify the covenant? So from the way in which we would want to understand progress. So let's just look at the efficiency of government in terms of ratification of a very important human rights treaty. It took our country 20 years from the date when the covenant was first signed. Now, that in itself is not an illustration of government's commitment to ensuring that one of the provisions in the Constitution, Section 237, which requires constitutional obligations to be performed diligently and without delay. So if you look at this one example. So it's an achievement to have a country ratify the covenant. But when you look at the amount of time that it has taken us to actually ratify it and what has happened in that space, so what has happened in that vacuum where, 20 years after signing, we then are ratifying. And I think for me that is, some of the complexities in answering the question, because I find it very difficult to then be definitive in terms of saying, yes, progress has been made, but to what extent, and what has been the implementation of some of the things that we laud. So whether it's legislation, ratification of international treaties, what has been the extent to which that has actually translated to a difference in the lives of South Africans, and particularly vulnerable communities of Black women in particular. So again, when we then look at some other examples, so let's then look back in terms of saying that from the perspective of the different spheres of government, so national, provincial, and local, what has been the performance of government departments that are specifically responsible for the mandate of socioeconomic rights? So looking at the Department of Housing, Basic Education, Social Development, looking at the 30 years and what has been the budget allocations of these departments in as far as the promotion. So one of the constitutional obligations that the state has is to promote socioeconomic rights. So what has been the budget allocation of these departments in the promotion of human rights? Then we consider another matrix. So looking then at what has been the audit performance of these government departments. So looking at the AG's reports on government departments at national, provincial, and local government level, how are these government departments performing? And again, the reality doesn't then live up to the constitutional provision of Section 237 of performing constitutional duties diligently. Looking again in terms of the assessments that institutions, state institutions like the Human Rights Commission and the Gender Commission have done in terms of human rights and gender assessments of these government departments. What have been the reports from these state institutions, and how have these reports then enabled these government departments to actually be more progressive in terms of achieving the rights? So just considering during COVID, the grants that...
You have 2 minutes remaining.
Okay. So perhaps let me then come to my conclusion and to then ask the question which I guess we all will continue to grapple with. Has government in the way in which we understand government made significant progress, and what can we do moving forward? So my answer is that I don't know. I'm not sure what the correct answer is. I think there's so much more that needs to be done. And I think the way in which we understand our rights and the framing of our rights must provide us with a reason to explore this question and to actually do the work that we need to do more diligently to ensure that it's a better society for all of us. I guess I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Naomi. Thank you very much. I'm now going to offer us, the panel members, a chance to engage with Ms. Naomi's presentation. Naomi, you said quite a lot of things, and how I wish I had answers to the things that you raised to show that I am a true academic. But your presentation even in me, caused me to, look deeper into things and to even come up with more questions. And the question that I have is that in in saying that the realization of socio-economic, rights will only happen or will happen in terms of the capacity of the resources of our state, didn't we sort of like put ourselves in a situation where we are enabling, the political elite to escape their obligations because they can always say, oh, well, there are no state resources or the state resources are not enough, right? So that's question number one. But also, I loved the fact that you stated that we need to develop a gendered lens. And I have seen this happening, and I like the fact that you also mentioned that, Mazibuko versus the city of Johannesburg. I believe that this was, a case where the court looked at the interconnectedness of the socio-economic rights with other civil and political rights, such as the right to human dignity, such as the right to life itself. Because back to your question when you said, have we done enough? I truly feel like we are running around in circles. Because when we started with S versus Makonyane and we were told that the right to life and human dignity are very important rights in when it comes to a human being or a legal subject, I thought that we would protect anything, or we would, emphasize the importance when it came to anything that has a potential to, directly affect those rights, such as the provision of water. For example, in S versus Mazibuko, they were dealing with water, where they said that water is not only a, basic. Let me just quote them quickly. They said that access to water is not a mere basic necessity, but it is fundamental as it has a direct impact, or it's directly impacts rights such as the human right of a person, and even the survival of a legal system. Meaning, we were speaking about this in the morning to say human rights are, socio-economic rights are connected to our basic rights, such as the right to life itself, such as the right to humanity. When we sever that connection, that is when we now, put these socio-economic rights into sort of like I don't know how to put it, but that's where we take away the importance of this category of rights. So that's what I believe Naomi was trying to say, let's look deeper as to what has been done and what sorry, that didn't come out the way that I wanted to. So far, what has been done, has it been enough? Has it been enough? So, building on to this discussion, I am going to now hand over to Mr. Mazibuko, who will focus on the unfinished business when it comes to issues of socio-economic injustice. Sir, Mr. Mkize, I'm sorry. Mr. Mkize, it's because I was talking about the Mazibuko case. Sorry. Mr. Mkize will address us, yes, when it comes to issues of socio-economic injustice. Thank you.
No, thanks very much, Rorisang, Madam Matlala, for the opportunity to be part of this august discussion, which I believe is extremely critical, and it's an opportunity to reflect 30 years later. And I think the university has taken a very big step to reflect on the issue of the state of human rights, coinciding with your 50 years as a law clinic. I think it's a wonderful thing. Prof, thank you very much for the opportunity to share the stage with your wisdom. And I'm sure the pearls of wisdom coming from you will also cascade down to us. Let me acknowledge the presence of the acting dean and head of the School of Law, Professor Kidd. I at first wondered, kid, are you kidding me? But I then said, okay, let me not say much. Prof, thanks very much for this opportunity. I think having students of law being part and parcel of these discussions is critical. Uncritical thinking has remained one of the challenges we face, that we produce parrot students who just says this is what the law say and don't even reflect on what was the spirit of the law. I think in my understanding, this issue of the letter and spirit of the law was one of the biggest departures from the old apartheid system, that would just say the law says this, and as Prof experienced, had to be then arrested in one way or the other because the letter part of the law was missing. But let me also acknowledge the presence then of Professor. I think a wonderful message that you have shared with us. You know, traveling that journey of what you went through becomes very nostalgic, because it reminds the young people who are here, I'm a 2000, that this freedom was not free. We always lose that perspective because we see ourselves living and sharing even this room together. By law, during the apartheid, since 1948, when it became really aggressive, of course, coloniality was always there and everything else. But when it became an institutionalized legal system, we couldn't sit together like this. It was just not practical. By now, the police would be here, wondering what is this university trying to do. They would introduce legal frameworks. Immorality Act, I could not laugh with an Indian woman or a white lady, because by then the police would enforce the law as an immorality act. So I love your motto. I don't know whether it's a motto or what, but you are saying law is not just for lawyers. It's very challenging for us who are here. And I'm not speaking from the perspective then of being a lawyer, but as a human rights activist and a defender, I believe I am appropriately placed to speak here. I am the CEO for the South African Human Rights Commission, and therefore I have a direct duty to ensure that the Bill of Rights in this country is realized. Naomi is my former colleague, and I was very happy to see her addressing us. And she said that she's using the lens or the perspective of a gender perspective. Very poignant for the purposes of a country beset with gender-based violence. So the position that she took, the lens she took, is to remind us then the women who have a triple oppression in terms of being denied their rights are still facing the same challenges. Particularly the African woman who was then, or a black woman, who was oppressed on the basis of race, then oppressed on the basis of gender, and then oppressed on the basis of cultural practices that were harmful to them. So the students who are here today, Acting Dean, I hope that because they are supposed to help us to be the knowledge producers, critical thinkers, I just don't know whether I should be asking them questions or not, so that we test whether they are ready to deal with the issue of whether South Africa has really progressed in achieving aspirations as enshrined in the Constitution relating to the Bill of Rights. My task for my own sins, I don't know, Ms. Matlala, why, but you're saying I must talk to the tackling and surmounting unfinished business in South Africa, in South Africa's democracy. The problem of socio-economic injustices 30 years into constitutional democracy. So I asked her, do I have to be politically correct? Or should I say it as I see it? Or as I engage with various people from different walks of life as they tell me what they see and what they experience? So I'll start by saying that as a Human Rights Commission, every year we will look at what are the top human rights violations, at least the top 5 that we have been dealing with. And recently, the top 5 includes, among others, the issue of equality. That this right is still a challenge. Racism still raises its ugly head. In fact, linked to that is the issue of inequality. Now, that is one issue that I thought will be important for me to share. The next one is the issue of health. The challenges that citizens still face, despite progress made. I mean, if you look at the infant mortality rate, it has reduced. But what is the state of health institutions in this country? Now, the next one that we normally have to deal with is education. Our children still die at pit latrines. Where is dignity if sanitation is dignity? Another one then, of course, the issue of education and access to equal education remains a problem that we are facing. In fact, every day you see the exodus of African children from townships and rural areas, and you ask yourself, why? It's a pursuit of a dream for quality education, but where they live, there is no sense there is such quality education. So is this right to quality education? In fact, it's strange that the Constitution doesn't say quality education. It talks to right to basic education. The component of quality issue is missing. So I will try as quickly as I can to run through. I'm tempted to move away from the script I was told I must follow, but I will try to follow it as quickly as I can to look at what are these socio-economic injustices. I will link that to the issue of, then at the end, talk to the tackling and surmounting this unfinished business. Unfinished business in our democracy. So, what are these socio-economic injustices we are talking about that we have inherited during the apartheid? Clearly, I mentioned a few. One of them is the issue of the land dispossession. Section 25 of the Constitution talks about restitution of land and expropriation of land. But who owns the land as we speak? Have those who were dispossessed violently so have had a redress around the issue of land? Without land, what can you do? You can't build a house. You can't be a farmer. You can't be an entrepreneur. Land is identity. So when you are dispossessed, particularly arable land, and only 13% was given to the Africans at the time during the Land Act and the creation of the Bantustan process, state. What exactly does this do? This injustice, has it been addressed? I'll give you the statistics just a end. The issue of unequal education remains a sore point. In fact, if you have not gone through the private education system, your chances even in the sport sector as an African child in particular are limited. When you come to university, I'm sure, acting professor, you will be, and the lecturers who might be here, you will know the challenges. There will be even things you call bridging courses. And who attends those bridging courses? And that is a delay in another year. Because our education system creates inequality. So this right, where inferior education for black children continues, is something that must be challenged 30 years later into our democracy. Another socio-economic right, we're talking about the issue of limited economic opportunities. We've got civil and political rights, and these rights are regarded as justiciable rights because courts can intervene and direct what should happen. But socio-economic rights are regarded as non-justiciable rights because you can't dictate to the state what it should do. The courts can't do that. Yet they are the fundamental rights, as also Sang was saying. They are the ones dealing with your humanity, your being. So, apartheid laws and policies systematically excluded black Africans from participating in the formal economy, restricted them to menial and low-paying jobs. The Group Areas Act of 1950 was enforced as residential segregation, confining blacks to very impoverished places where they cannot exercise economy. So as we speak today, the question is, who owns companies that are at JSE? So blacks are still taught how to look for employment, not to be entrepreneurs, not to be the captains of industry. This is again linked to the state of education. Now, health inequalities is one of the issues that creates a problem. Even myself, I rely on private health sector with my medical aid. I can't go to Prince Mshini if I'm sick. I just begin to think, King Edward, what's going to happen to me? I look for net care. What that does to the most vulnerable, are they then having a proper right to health, quality health care services? This right remains what former President Thabo Mbeki, among other things, calls a dream deferred. Because if these rights are not realized, they remain a dream deferred. What did we struggle for? For a South Africa where rights of every individual is respected. So, the Constitution then, what does it tell us? Just in the preamble, it says that we recognize the injustices of the past, of our past. I will skip the other part and just say we adopt this Constitution as a supreme law of the Republic so as to heal divisions of the past and establish a society based on democratic values, social justice, and importantly, fundamental human rights. I will close quote at that level because of time. I would have loved to talk about this because fundamental human rights are universal rights for both an individual as well as a community. That is where you see the distinction of the African Charter of human rights on human and people's rights. So, socioeconomic rights, therefore, are those rights that give people access to basic things like the need to live so that they lead a dignified life. So right to dignity, to humanity, to equality, these are important rights. In conclusion, because of time, I would just like to say the following around the issues that I was asked to deal with. I've just highlighted some of the challenges about the rights that we are saying as remaining very elusive. A lot of these have been done as socio-economic rights. But I think also let's acknowledge that there were institutions that were established to try and help with the dealing with this. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission was established in 1995. The aim was to try and fulfill the dream where there would be restorative justice rather than restitution. Yet, even today, we are still struggling with the issue of incomplete business of the TRC. The family of Ahmed Timol had to deal with the issue of the inquiry for them to be able to get to the truth of what happened to their loved one. The issue of repatriations as well as the issues of justice for those who did not go to the TRC remains elusive. So how do we then build a South Africa based on fundamental human rights? How do we then build a South Africa where there is social cohesion and nation building, when the injustices of the past, particularly on inequality, continues, unemployment, and these things have got a face, by the way. When you say unemployment, who is at the lowest rudder? There is a race attached to it, which means white supremacy continues and black inferiority continues. So how do you bring these parties together? The instrument we have is the issue of human rights, because it says we must respect the right of each other. And this is an instrument I think is powerful for us to use to achieve social cohesion and nation building. Affirmative action was also instituted and employment equity. But if you look at the recent Department of Labor issue about employment equity, and it's still, or captains of industry in terms of even the executives, other than mainly in government, it's in private sector, it's still dominantly white, dominantly male. So, unfinished business has to be finished in one way or the other. If affirmative action is rejected, the disparities, economic disparities of the past are going to continue. The issue of black economic empowerment was also instituted. But most of the time, the question is only the black elite, the political elite, is more of a beneficiary, while the majority of the Africans who were supposed to be the right people and the beneficiaries who had the aspiration that they will participate effectively in the economy of this country remain marginalized. The issue of the land reform, as I said to you, only 10%, 30 years later almost, has been redistributed. In other words, as we sit here, even these high-rise buildings and estates that are there, why do you have KwaMashu that far, and then Newlands, and then Mhlanga, and who lives there? Just the apartheid spatial distribution and planning was racist in its nature. KwaMakuta is far from the town. It was deliberate at the time. Education and skills development remains a problem. But we must congratulate and accept that a lot has been done, because if you look at the social welfare program, a lot of people still say they survive on what? They survive on grants, at least to fight this level of poverty. But it can't be right to create a nation of dependencies. So I think reality today is that we have unfinished business that we must just try and attend to, so that the socio-economic rights become a reality and are realized. We have an opportunity to do so, and we have to challenge the status quo so that it changes. I just want to then say to Professor Acting Dean and Risang, thank you for giving us an opportunity. I could not go into detail, but what do you think should happen? As my last point will be, I believe there is a section in the Constitution that talks to a charters of human rights, Section 234. It has never been used to begin to force these socioeconomic rights to be a reality. We must force departments or government on the state to have these charters of human rights so that they can be held accountable if these rights are not realized. And as a commission, we're going to explore how we effect this section of the Constitution. Over and above Section 184, subsection 3, where we are expected to ask governments to give us the measures they have put in place towards the realization of rights in their prospective areas. But I think working together with the NGOs, with the universities, 30 years later, looking at the next 30 years, can't we make South Africa being synonymous with a culture of human rights? It's possible, but we need to work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mkize. I'm about to open up the floor or give our audience an opportunity to engage with the views that were raised by our three speakers. But before doing that, I see sort of like a common thread between what the three speakers have presented today. And I'd like to go back to what you say, Prof. What I'm realizing when, each speaker appears before us and basically go through their presentation is that it, takes us back to what you were saying, or rather the lesson that you were trying to show us, that we can have a situation where we are dealing with people that belong to a nation where we have the same laws, but people sort of like experience those laws differently, perhaps, and this is because of certain factors such as gender, factors such as race, and other, many factors. That's why in Ms. Webster's presentation, she said that it's about time we develop, or we sort of like adopt a gendered lens. And Ms. Mkize is also showing us that let's not forget, when we are dealing with these issues, that we have, those marginalized groups, right? Where if we are having a problem in South Africa, to them is 3 times, worse, if I am to put it that way, right? So there's that thing to say we might stay in a country where the Constitution is the most praised for being, drafted well, and for in a country where we are praised for, how meticulous and well-drafted our laws are. But the implementations of these laws do not affect us, the same. Because this, in the same country where, socio-economic rights are praised and we do have these rights, we still have, the marginalized groups where these concepts are nothing but an illusion to them. they have not yet materialized. You know, when they hear about these concepts, they only hear about these concepts and know about these concepts from the Constitution, not because of, you know, their lived experiences. So it is a sad reality to sort of like see this. Now it becomes a question, was this the vision of, you know, the drafters and the people that fought for this democracy, like Mr. Mkhize said? So I'm going to now let the mic go around for people who, you know, thank you, sir.
Thank you. I just wanted to say to Krista, law students here and attorneys and advocates, I imagine, that I think the message shouldn't be lost on the law students who are going to graduate sooner rather than later. And that's why I'm turning to look at you and ignoring the panel, my apologies, is a lot of social change can take place through you, through your practice. There's so much that you can do to change things. We can sit back and we can wait for government to do things, and we can sit back and we can wait for gift of the givers, and we can sit back and wait for whoever. But as lawyers, we can change things. You can actually get into a community and fix something. You can go and take someone with a sad story and change something for that person's life. That'll pay forward. So as lawyers, as whatever you end up as academics, as attorneys, as advocates, as judges, wherever you end up, just don't forget that you are an agent of change. You're uniquely positioned as a lawyer. Or as a law grad, because you understand these things better than everybody else, to go and pay this thing forward, to go and move things forward for people. And don't ever forget, you have a duty to your fellow South Africans. It's all well and good to sit and complain we don't have this, and the ocean water is dirty, and the government is not doing this, and the ruling elite are doing well, and the rest of us are struggling, or the middle class is doing okay, and the rest of the country is struggling. But we've got to stand up and do something about it, and lawyers are in such a nice position, such a good position to do something about it. Take someone to court, go and deal with it, go and find someone who's battling and go and deal with it. You can change a life for somebody and it can continue. And over your whole career, you can make a massive difference. You think what the law clinic in 50 years has done. Can you imagine how many thousands of patients have gone through that law, have gone through that law clinic. Every one of them has got a story. Every one of them has been abused or needs maintenance or has had their children removed by the state or by an ex or whatever it is. They've been hit by a car, whatever it is. In 50 years, that law clinic has affected so much change. You guys should be really proud of that. That's your university. Third law clinic in the country, Prof? Was this the third law clinic in the country? Yeah, third one in the country. Amazing. Started in Prof's office. And now you guys go down and visit it, go see Dr. Holness. I'm sure he'll love me advertising. Go and visit Dr. Holness, go knock on his door, go check out his law clinic. It's massive, it's huge. 50 years of helping people. Can you imagine where those people would be today without the law clinic? So thank you, that's just my comment. It wasn't so much of a question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for your input, and I'm going to join you in creating more problems for Dr. Holness. To say, I also was talking to Prof, and I wanted to find out if students do go to, the law clinic and find out what's happening and how to, be involved. Because when I was a student from first year, recess time, I wouldn't go home. I'd work at the law clinic, right? I'd work at the law clinic for free. I wanted to know, how do we consult people? How do we help? Because when I started as a first year student, we were told that, okay, here's the thing, here's the harsh truth. Everyone is going to graduate here after 4 years with their LLB. So you'll have that piece of paper. But what will distinguish you from the rest, right? So the problem with our law students today is that you guys wait for the paper in order to, now I'm gonna be a change, maker. No, start, finding out ways on how to, bring about that change that we desperately need now. And we have institutions that are built with a rich, history, like the law clinic. You can learn a lot. So thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. My question is to Mr. Mkhize. I believe that the South African Human Rights Commission has recently employed the use of child government monitors, very much modelled on the Western Cape Commissioner for Children. And what they envisage, I understand, is using children as change agents within communities. Could you take us through that vision, particularly if we consider that the right to education was mentioned by yourself as one of those areas where we take a couple of steps forward and yet we seem to be stuck in the past? Thank you.
Thanks very much for that opportunity, the question you're raising. Maybe let me start with what was raised, if you just allow me, because as a Human Rights Commission, we also looking at opportunities we can give to legal practicing students, particularly also those who have just graduated, working with LPC, so that they can be able to have some few hours that they can use as part of community service. So we would like to have that partnership with you to see how we can give them opportunity, they can assist us, particularly because we rely so much on pro bono services also as a commission, because by our budget it's just about 200 million rand, and yet there's so much work to do, particularly law is expensive. Justice is expensive in this country. So I think your advice about agents of change is something that we must really institutionalize in the mind of our students on what it means to serve rather than to be served. On the issue of the child ambassadors, yes, we've instituted the program throughout the country. It's called Child Ambassadors for Human Rights. And currently, the vision is that the issue of children's rights, if we don't catch them young, they are the very ones who, because of the nature of society they grow from, become the very same violators of rights. But if they understand the Bill of Rights from being young and what does it mean to be an ambassador for human rights, we think they will then cascade that down to other children, because children understand each other better than us as adults trying to tell them what to do. So we thought it would be the best initiative to begin this movement. We said we're not going to call it a project, because it then project has a lifespan. But if we say that they are the ambassadors and they must then be that in their schools, in their families, we should be able to start moving the needle towards a culture for human rights. So that is why we're working on that program as Human Rights Commission. And it's been amazing, I must say. The children are just embracing this, because we also educated them themselves on the issue of the social media and how abusive that is. A risk while it is an advantage, but if you don't understand it, you're going to have a problem as a child, because bullying that happens on that platform can cause a lot of children to even commit suicide. So we're thinking that let's work with the children, and they are the future. Thank you very much.
Okay. Just to say what was said earlier is the need to rekindle this idea of voluntarism, because we've lost that. It changed on the 27th of April 1994. I remember when we wanted to monitor the first elections to see they were democratic. 2 weeks before, I'd been demonstrating at the barricades with the students. 27th of April, Judge Vuga Shabalala was the IEC officer for KZN, and the students staged a sit-in at his office in Field Street. They did not want to monitor the elections unless they were going to be paid. And I said, guys, we've been fighting for years for democracy. We've been doing everything for everyone else. Why are we suddenly doing this? This is important for our democracy. No, it's not fair. Some guys are going to be paid. But the point I want to make is that even if you're not paid, volunteer, get that experience. If you go down to a clinic or you go to an NGO during the vacation, you're learning valuable experience, even if you're not being paid. I shouldn't pick you out, but I've got a good example sitting in the audience there who's helping me now clear out my office after the centre was burned by students, and she's volunteering to do it. But if you volunteer, you will learn. And volunteer, I don't know if you can take volunteers at your office, but if they take that, even if the guys have got not much money to pay you, it's worth doing, because you are getting experience. And what you need is experience, the reality of what is happening in society and what is happening in your own development as a human being as well. Thanks.
Questions? Yes. We should keep up.
Okay, yeah.
So, floor is now open to any questions, comments.
Greetings. My question is directed to Mr. Mkhize. Mr. Mkhize, I heard that you have highlighted the issue of socio-economic. So my question is, how do you see socio-economic factors impacting future of our society, and what strategies do you believe are essential for addressing these challenges? Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
No, thanks, Mr. Zulu, for the question. First, I must from the outset indicate that I do not have a monopoly of wisdom on how this South African society must be. I only have a dream that this country one day, equality will be the basis on how we relate with one another, not on the basis of race, color, or class. And in that regard, I think the socio-economic factors, if they are not addressed and the injustices persist, we're gonna continue to move apart from each other. And when we do that, we won't have a country, because the only way we can build the future is on the basis of respect for one another, first at a level of humanity. And then we deal with the issue of what you would regard as a right to development, where in line with our constitution that we must free the potential of everyone. We give opportunity to our children to be able to exercise their potential unrestrained. So if we can just make sure that these socioeconomic rights, particularly the top for education, the issue of health, the issue of food and food security, the issues of the land issue, the land question can't be avoided forever, and then the issue of security itself. If we make sure that those foundations are strong enough as rights, and this country becomes what we have dreamed of it, being a culture that respects the culture of human rights, then I'm sure the future will look both good. But as things stand, if we look at I think those who have studied, if you've read, there's an old book that talked about South Africa post-democracy having to choose between a high road and a low road. We look like we are on a low road currently. And the factors contributing to that, I think we the adults are responsible. And we cannot bequeath that to our children. So we need to ensure that we choose the high road, which was promised by democracy and its benefits. So I think our government must be held accountable as much as possible in realization of these rights and or creating environment conducive to them. But we also as citizens, in line with the 5th pillar of social cohesion initiative, it talks to active citizenry, that we must be actively involved in defining the future and the fortunes of our country. But most importantly is access to opportunities for those who have been marginalized. As long as they are not free themselves, we will live behind the high walls and will go to the shooting ranges and practice, because we are all not free from fear of what is likely to happen while I'm sleeping with my Porsche and my 3-story house, when there is someone who we call a vagrant on the street because he has nothing to eat and no shelter above his head. Thanks.
Thanks. Just to follow up from that, the thing about human rights is, apart from them being universal and the fact that we get them from the moment of birth, they're also inalienable. They cannot be taken away. That is why the United Nations was able to call apartheid was a crime against humanity, because it doesn't matter what laws your country passes, you've still got those basic human rights. They're still recognized. But lastly, they are also indivisible. So, although they talk about first generation, civil and political, second generation, socioeconomic, third generation, cultural, and those rights are indivisible. And the fact with if you don't have the right to life, and you can't eat, you can't get food, therefore you're going to die. So, and we need to emphasize that. Unfortunately, you heard about the delay in signing the International Covenant on Social and Economic Rights. And I think one of the reasons is our Constitutional Court has run away from the concept of a minimum core, that there should be a minimum core for all human rights, and there should be a minimum core for social and economic rights. And they haven't really spelt that out. They didn't do that in Subramani. Children, to a certain extent, have got a bit of protection because they've got the right, and it's not limited technically within available resources. But we need to push that, I think, that agenda about rights being indivisible. And the African Charter also talks about the best attainable. Right, so we need to look at that.
Thank you very much. I also want to build up on what Mr. Mkize mentioned, but this is when he was standing at the podium. He said something that's important, that we need to be very careful to ensure that the state does not create more people that are dependent on it. Right? So one of the issues that comes to my mind now, because I was, experiencing mental load shedding, right? Now it has came back to me. One of the issues that comes to my mind is the decision that the state is currently taking right now when it comes to NSFAS. They are taking, they're saying that there is not enough funding. But at the same time, we know that we have grants. I'm not saying these things are things that are not helping people, because Mr. Mkize did say that, social assistance, there are people that, live off these things. But we should be careful not to create a cycle of, people that are dependent on the state. Because here we are taking money from someone tomorrow who will be dependent on themselves, a student, right? We are not funding their tertiary or, education, right? They drop out. What happens? They join the same group of, people that are dependent from the state. So are we now becoming a factory of people that depend on the state? So these conversations are important, because should people that are, the political elite know how, these socio-economic rights and these rights are connected to the future of our country, decisions like this wouldn't be, that's what I believe. If there's nothing from, okay, it seems like there's a question. Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. So it's actually very encouraging that we're having these discussions. And I think what is important is that these discussions need to go beyond these walls. Right now, we are speaking to people within the field of law, education. So we have a school of education, but to what extent do we actually collaborate? To what extent do these types of sessions take place across all sectors of our university? So when we speak about human rights and we speak about teachers and we speak about education, we know what is happening in our schools. We understand in terms of, for example, that sanitation example that you gave and our children not having proper facilities, being taught in places where there's not even windows in a school. What are all of us doing about that? I love the idea of volunteering, which is something that every one of our students within our university should be expected, and I'm saying expected, to do, at least in their first, second, third, or fourth year, whatever. At the same time, human rights, but we also need to think about the mental state of people. So when we speak about mental health and social justice, it's so important that we see them together. And when we think about giving people a grant of 350, what dignity are we giving to those people? So yes, we can give the grant. They live off it. What types of lives are they actually living? So my big question is, and it came out, is it the state? Is it the people who own all the big business? Or is it every one of us in the way in which we relate to one another on an everyday basis? Thank you.
Thank you for that. In the 1985, when we introduced street law, we actually got the student teachers involved so that they could go out to the schools, and we also taught the teachers how to teach street law so that they could go out. We made it interdisciplinary. We did the same with the social work department, so that when they went out, they did the same. But these initiatives just got lost in time. I've been back to see the Deputy Vice-Chancellor at Edgewood, Msibi, to say we should be doing this again, but nothing has come of that. And we could do it here, we could do it DUT, and we could be training sets of teachers so that they can do street law themselves, so you don't have to rely on us. And we can send the students to train. We can run training workshops for you. When there was plenty of money for promoting democracy, everybody came. The moment there was no budget, nobody wanted to come. So if we can get that volunteerism coming, if you've got a teachers' association, you want to do it, ask us, and we can arrange for someone to come out and actually train your teachers so that they can do it on the ground as well.
I fully agree with the educator. The discussion needs to be broadened beyond these walls. And we just, from our perspective as Human Rights Commission, we honestly believe that it will be very important that the issue of human rights is a discussion and a part of conversation with everyone. From home, even when we're sitting alone, just how we change the mindset of a boy child about treating his or her sister. It's just important so that the rights of, just on the gender basis, the sense of equality is there. But also that if we I believe that because here we're talking about what the university is creating as the legal eagles of the future, isn't it? So, the laws by apartheid regime were designed to effect an evil system. You have an opportunity to help define and redefine our laws so that they achieve what we want. It's South Africa we want. And that is a South Africa that respects human rights, and that is prosperous, and that we are all seeing each other as equal, whether before the law or before my own eyes. That is what you here have a duty to help us craft the laws and enforce those laws. And just like apartheid did for the evil, now you're doing it for the good of the country. So let's do it and use the law to achieve the South Africa we want. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mkhize. Yes, there is a hand. Okay.
I feel like I need to do an advertisement picking up on the Prof's call for volunteerism. In this room, there's most probably at least 60 people, 70 people that each one of you could solve a problem in my world. And my world is downtown in the middle of the city, and 20 very lucky street law students start their this semester street law engagement with street people, homeless people in downtown. But that's 20 out of the whole university in a semester. But there's no reason why each of you couldn't take up one person's plight. And what struck me a lot about Prof's engagement was the thing that changed the way that students reacted when we were talking about the apartheid era and the so-called black township students who knew what it was like to be arrested. I think we're almost losing that now when you come to the marginalized. Vagrants is even a polite word that most people refer to the people who are homeless on the street. And do we know the experience of having all your documentation bundled up into the back of a municipal truck and told you can go and fetch it if you can find the dump we take it to. So it's a bit of an advert, it's a bit of a thing. The law clinic, the street law folk have come and they have made huge changes in individual people's lives. What we need to do is maybe try and find a way of systematize it and change some of the bigger issues that are still affecting arrest, dispossession of property, that sort of stuff. But yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity of being here with you to celebrate a very, very wonderful institution in terms of giving back in some way or another. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. If anyone is keen to help down there, there's also the Hurley Centre.
That's who I'm from.
Oh, you didn't tell us, okay. Well, the Hurley Centre, those guys, we have had our street law students there and the law clinics, and you get fantastic experience because the mantra for street law is always ask first and then tell. Ask the community, what are your problems? Then give them the say, well, this is what your problem is. How do you think you can solve it? And see what they can do. And then if they can't do it, you ask the community, has anybody managed to solve this? And you'll find somebody has. And who solved it by themselves? Who solved it by going to somebody else to help them? Who did you go to? Some things we can't solve till the next election or whatever. But that is empowering for people. Ask and then tell. The other one is less is more. Don't bombard them with information, because at the end of the day they'll be drowning. Give them the tools so that they can find things. And lastly, it is about them. It's not about you. It's not about how fantastic you are with the LLB, how many credits you've got, how much you know. It's about how much they're going to learn. Are they going to learn from you? Do you follow that little mantra? Ask and then tell. Less is more, and it's about them, not about you. That'll help you sort of get into that mode of actually dealing with real issues and learning about real issues in the community.
Thank you, thank you. There is a question there. We are only taking 2, then we're going to wrap up. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. To the law clinic, my question is, do you have awareness strategies to engage the normal citizen? Because the only time I learned about the law clinic was through a friend of mine that had attended the law school, and that was when I was looking for advice as an entrepreneur, how to go about with, with just my partnership. So I just wanted to find out, do you have awareness strategies for the normal civilian to be able to know that there's a law clinic that's available, because it is such, a valuable service? Thank you.
We are going to talk about the law clinic afterwards, I think. I don't know how many more minutes of this, but we will be talking about the law clinic. Again, in the old days, we actually got the radio to run programs, and we would give them some simple scenarios of examples. For example, street law type or clinic type example would be someone wakes up and finds that while they were semi-conscious, people took a thumbprint on a power of attorney, and the attorneys were collecting the money without even telling the people that they were collecting the money. Now, what do you do about that thing? What is a kid who's asked to get a paper or something, what are you supposed to do when that happens? So we gave them we had Maxim Boyer, the street law lawyer, and Maxim Boyer, the street lawyer, became a TV program and also on the radio. And he had these adventures about different things that happened and how we could actually deal with them. And it was done in isiZulu and in English, both. Yeah. So we were doing that years ago, but a lot of these initiatives have just died, John. Okay.
I believe there is a second, the last question, then we're closing. Thank you.
Thank you. Good day, good afternoon, everybody, and all protocols observed. I have a question for Mr. Mkhize. So the children's program was mentioned, but also I'm not sure if everybody else is aware, but the SAHRC has the Youth Championship program also implemented. So that is, as Mr. Mkhize mentioned, for the AMA 2000s. That's for us, I like to call us the youthlings. So I attended one of these meetings last week, and I've been part of the Youth Championship program for a while. And one thing that I've noticed is I'm finding it difficult to think and implement long-term strategies, because like you've mentioned, education, healthcare, and gender inequality and all of those things, we do go out into the communities and we talk to them, we spread awareness, we go to the schools, we visit them, we inform them about why education is important and all of those things, food drives. But these are all short-term solutions that we as normal people can do. I'm far from being a lawyer. I'm a final year law student, but if I'm being realistic, I still have a long way to go before I myself can take a case to court and deal with it pro bono. So as just an ordinary individual, I don't like how I'm always having to do these short-term strategies, because when I leave the area, it's gone. There's nothing more there until the team comes back, and I'm not very happy with that way. So do you have any recommendations that we as normal quote, normal people can do to enhance longevity in this type of program? And just another subtopic with my question here is that as the children's program and the youth program, I feel that we're making a lot of progress with that, but we also fail to address that another obstacle I find is the older generation. You can't teach a dog new tricks. And sometimes they are so set in the ways that when we try to enhance this new knowledge about them, when we say, you know what, as the pillar of your household, as the pillar of a community, you have this duty to implement this knowledge on your younger people, on your clan over here. But they refuse because they're so stuck in their ways. And the whole, book of human rights is just washed out the window without a second thoughts. And I think that is a very big problem that I don't have any knowledge upon. So if you could please share some ideas or recommendations, thank you.
Thanks very much, Prof. I just hope that you don't mean me by old dogs teach them new tricks. But thank you very much. I think the issue of sustainable interventions is quite important. Maybe it's a question of how do we design this and then make sure that there is follow-up and monitoring of such programs and whether people implement them. But remember, human rights are also a soft issue. It's about the change of mindset. And you might not be able to achieve it overnight. So you must not feel guilty or shortchanged when you don't see change immediately. Sometimes the fact of the matter is that you've planted the seed. And upon reflection, that person, him or her alone, will be able to say, I was part of this engagement. What does it mean to me? We've got what we call a SHINE program. Maybe we must engage with you. It's a social harmony program that we're trying to say it starts with me, that's change, and then it moves with my family, and then my community, and then at a broader societal level. So we might have to engage with you on that SHINE program also, which has got a number of strategies. But we are also working with the University of Cape Town. There is a particular curriculum on human rights we are developing. But we believe that higher institutions of learning should be having a very clear drive on pro-human rights education. Because if we don't do that, it will also be like what South Africa is currently, only united when Rugby World Cup is playing. After Rugby, we go back to our old roots and habits, and we don't recognize each other even on the malls that I was sitting with you next to you during the Rugby match, So we need to find a way of building this. And lastly, just to say that what do we do from here? I believe that as this team, while we are the custodians of the human rights issue as a commission, we just need to continue to demonstrate our commitment, particularly government, that they are an antithesis of what apartheid was, and ensuring that there is respect for human rights, just on the services they deliver. Whether it is at Department of Health, whether it is about food, or about education, but at the heart of everything is that we must have very strong education system. You can't have a pass rate of 33% and think you are creating future leaders. It's just not possible. So education is really a foundation that can break the cycle of poverty and challenge issues of inequality. But as long as education is floundering as it is doing, we're going to continue to perpetuate injustices of the past. And that's all I wanted to say. But this team, just to say that I think this gathering must then serve as an opportunity for that true introspection and reflection on what still needs to be done. It will not help us to keep on shouting about the best constitution when the real lives of our people and the reality they are facing is contrary to the praise we give to the Constitution. Let's give praise to a better life and then say the Constitution has made a difference. In that way, we will be able to build it again, the South Africa we want. Thanks.
If I can just add a footnote by saying, if you're going to teach and educate, I want to give you 7 points you should use if you want people to understand it. Firstly, when you have a topic, you're going to talk about the law. We've mentioned the mantra. You do the 3 things, the mantra. But once you've spoken about the law, you need to talk about the policy. Why do we have these laws? What is the purpose of this law? Unless people understand that, they're not really going to remember what the law is about. Then you've got to deal with conflicting values, because law is full of conflicts. If a man is beating his wife and he is the sole breadwinner, and the magistrate is going to sentence him, if he puts him in jail, who's going to look after the family? So you need to look at those conflicts. Then you always use what we call an interactive strategy. You must not just talk, because educational psychologists tell us if you just lecture, people forget 90%, so they only remember 10%. If you do audio-visual, they remember. If you get them to read for themselves, they remember, because they're processing it, they remember 10%. If you do audio-visual, they remember 20%. If you do a demo, they will remember 30%. But if you put them in small groups of about 5, get them to discuss problems and things, and get them to think about it, they remember 50%. If you do a demo and then practice, this is how a lawyer cross-examines. Now you cross-examine, they remember 75%. And if you train them to go out and teach others, and you can use techniques, each one, teach one a whole lot, they remember 90%. So remember to use an interactive strategy. And then also, we always give practical advice. If you have been beaten, this is where you can go to get a protection order. If you've got a human rights problem, you can go to the local human rights office. If you need a lawyer, you can try the Women Lawyers Association in KZN. They run a clinic. You can try the Legal Aid Clinic here. You can get hold of probono.org, who also provide lawyers. So we need to give people that empowerment so that they know, first they can identify they've got a problem, and then they know where to go to solve that problem as well. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I was going to add something, but Prof just, cemented the whole thing and made it clear to say you might just think that you are simply, bringing awareness to these communities, but you are, on a small scale, solving, issues that affect these communities. And these programs also enable you to, right now you said that you are at a position where you can figure out what is a long and, what is a short-term strategy. This also puts you in a position, tomorrow you'll be, sitting in these, roles, right? You will know that we've been doing this for years. We've been bringing awareness to the communities for years. How about because now you've even started thinking about these long-term. So it's that seed that Mr. Mkhize was telling you about, that it is important to now put the seed in our youth as early as possible, because look at now your train of thought. You even want how to solve this thing altogether, right? So yeah. So it's been a very, very enriching discussion. And Mr. Mkhize mentioned something to say, let's give credit where it's due. Let's stop praising the Constitution, but rather look at the lived experiences of our the members of the public. And I would like to also draw a parallel to the biblical Adam and Eve, right? We do know that Adam and Eve in the Bible lived in paradise, but now they had no clothes to wear. So when I draw from that, we are surrounded by, wealth. We are surrounded by abundance, but majority of our people in the nation are still poverty-stricken. They still live in, conditions that are poor, living conditions that are poor. This is, in a way, our, modern Adam and Eve. So I believe everything has been said. I was going to give, but it's not necessary. The point has been taken home. I would like to now thank the head of the School of Law, Professor Michael Keat, for allowing us to have this event, for the support that the School of Law has provided us, so that this idea, what was once an idea, today, came to fruition, right? Then I would also like to thank the distinguished members of my panel. What I love about them, they have very thick CVs. Do not think they don't. But today they were like, you know what? Let's just forget about the credentials. We want to connect to the students. We want to, to make an impact. So hence, I didn't give you the long who's who did what, right? So yes. So thank you very much, Mr. Mkhize. Thank you, thank you very much, Professor Mikwet Mason. Thank you, Naomi. Is Naomi, Miss Webster, still joining us online? Okay. I would like to thank her as well. I'd also like to extend a heartfelt, gratitude to the guests for taking your time and being with us here today. I'm even out of words. Thank you, guys. Thanks. Tandy, you can. This is our small, token of appreciation to say we appreciate you taking your time and being with us here today. Oh, I'm just going to. Yes. Okay, wait.
Which is going to be slightly less formal, although we still have Professor McCoy Mason, who will make sure that we have it at the right level, which is grassroots, right? And we're also going to be welcoming Dr. Holness, who I know very well, who will be joining us to tell us a little bit about the law clinic where he's the director. I am not entirely aware of the proceedings, the order of proceedings, so I just need to double check. Prof, are you going first? Dave's going first. All right. So without further ado, welcome, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam MC. Welcome to everybody who has remained. We did have RSVPs from funders, members of the profession, including NADL and the BLA, the judiciary, partner organizations. Was glad to see Stuart a bit earlier, from Dennis Hurley, law school colleagues, including our acting dean, Professor Kidd, students and former students, law clinic, current and former staff, distinguished guests. What a privilege it is to be here. 50 years, it's a good innings, I think. In cricket, you raise your bat after 50 years. So I think we can raise our bat after 50 years of contribution. There is a reason why many of you are here beyond the food, and that is that you've made your mark in some way or have got some link with the law clinic. And the fact that you are here enriches the experience even more. Since 1973, so we're actually 51 years old, the Law Clinic at Howard College has championed the cause of human rights through providing free access to legal services to the indigent and offering support to vulnerable communities and training students and candidate attorneys via clinical legal education. The Law Clinic forms part of the law school, and we have our sister clinic at Pietermaritzburg, and they're just a little bit younger than we are, which I sometimes remind my colleague, Dr. Badul, jokingly, that she's in my rearview mirror. And we're members of the South African University Law Clinic Association and affiliated with the Legal Practice Council. So we're all legit, don't worry. It's indeed an honor to stand in the footsteps of a giant like Professor McCoy-Mason, such a humble man, but really it is humbling to speak after him and to speak before him. The person who established this particular law clinic and really the law clinic movement and street law in South Africa. If we can just put our hands together for Professor McCoy-Mason. My name is Dr. Dave Holness. I've been privileged to be the director of the law clinic for the last 16 years. So I'm almost a third of the clinic's existence. So I'm also getting on a bit. For most of you, you know what a law clinic is, but there may just be a few who don't. So let me just tell you what this law clinic thing is. Law clinic is like a coin, ladies and gentlemen. There are two sides to the coin. There's the provision of legal services to the indigent, and there's the training of law students. And they are two sides of the same coin because by training the students, you provide an army of people to empower the clinic to do more work. And the clinic doing their work trains the students in the form of a laboratory setting. So that's why it's two sides of the same coin. I'm absolutely delighted to see three former principals here, Dr. Eben van der Merwe, Mr. Rishen Baran Singh, and Ms. Tandeka Duma. They were all principals in the law clinic. I think Dr. van der Merwe and Mr. Rishen Baran Singh were really part of the furniture, but for her time that she was with us, Ms. Duma as well. Now, CLE, which is the acronym for Clinical Legal Education, is a tool to tackle the gross inequalities still faced by so many in South Africa, as illustrated in our colloquium today. I think Mr. Mkhize really reflected that extremely well. There were two authors, Hayward and Hassim, who said, whether in relation to health, housing, education, food, or access to social assistance, access to legal services is often the lever that enables the realization of rights. Access to legal services is often the lever that enables the realization of rights. The Law Clinic has been involved with some high-impact litigation over the years, although that's not our focus at the moment. For those diligent law students who would like to take out the law reports in the old sense or look it up on LexisNexis this evening, 2006 Constitutional Court, the Law Clinic, as it used to be called the Campus Law Clinic, went to the Constitutional Court, and it revolved around safeguards to ensure the constitutional right of access to adequate housing when you sell in execution. So in essence, making sure that when someone's house is sold, it's sold for a reasonable value. Now, the Law Clinic was not a party to the SCA decision, but it took it on appeal to the CC, and the CC said, although the Law Clinic was not a litigant in the SCA, the court held the fact that the Law Clinic was not a party to the proceedings in the SCA did not constitute an absolute bar to their obtaining leave to appeal to this court. So there has been an impact even in the Con Court by this particular Law Clinic. Because many clients of the Law Clinic live in rural and township areas, clinic staff and students periodically travel to less accessible areas or other social justice providers. Dennis Hurley Centre is one example. We've recently had another outreach to a place of safety for abused women. The name I can't mention to protect those who are housed there. But if ever you are aware of possible outreach sites, please do approach me. We've got a very hard-working, relatively new principal attorney, Mrs. Sandeepa Ramkasun, who's been looking into different outreach sites. So we are very excited by all of these, and within our capacity, we are trying to assist wherever we can. We also try to raise human rights awareness. David has already alluded somewhat to the role of street law, but I'm sure he'll talk to that some more, because, again, they work hand in glove, street law and law clinics. You may have noted when I started the speech, I actually said, although you were still probably chewing, funders, members of the profession, etc. I put funders first, because if you don't have money, you can't do anything. So if I can just reflect on some of the funders over the last 5 decades, I can only really reflect on those over the last 2 decades. University of KwaZulu-Natal itself, in terms of salaries and premises and some other funding. Oxfam, MOT, the Department of Justice, the Attorneys Fidelity Fund, the Ally Trust. I see that we've got a Ally Trust trustee here today. Professor Karthi Govinda, who's the chair, wasn't able to be here, but there's another trustee here. And currently we get funding from Legal Aid South Africa and the Legal Practice Council. So although they were invited, and I don't think they have been able to attend, in their absence, just to thank them for their support, because without that we can't operate. The Law Clinic is a law firm. We've got to pay our staff. Although we're committed to the work, you still have to put bread on the table. We have to pay our staff, and we've got disbursement costs like sheriffs, etc. So our funders help us make those operations possible. Some of the kind of cases that we take on, it's a very broad range of civil matters. So I'd rather do it in the negative and say the kind of matters we don't take on. We don't take on any criminal work. Our brothers and sisters at Legal Aid South Africa cover criminal work quite comprehensively. And we don't take on claims against the Road Accident Fund and certain other types of matters. But other types of civil matters, we tend to take on the vast majority. Examples of divorce. We had a big equality court matter late last year. Sadly, we have a lot of domestic violence and divorce matters. Claims in money, be they delict, contract, unjust enrichment. Family law and children's matters. I see we've got the family advocate. Thank you for the family advocate joining us today. Housing and evictions, discrimination. So it's a broad range of matters. Who is eligible for our services? Low-income earners, so it's approximately double the minimum wage, which you might say is not a low income, but the average law firm, if you were to go to my sister at Norton Rose Fulbright for a deposit on a divorce, you probably have to put down a 50,000 Rand deposit on the divorce. So if you're earning 7,000 Rand, that's not going to get very far in terms of payment of your deposit. So earning a low wage, or you're unemployed, or you're getting a state grant. Students, by the way, you are also considered indigent, which is perhaps the only good time in your life where it's good to not have any money, is that we are able to assist you. And if you've got grandparents, etc., who are getting state grants or people who are getting disability grants, please send them our way. And you can't own fixed property over a particular sum. In other words, you can't, for example, have a house worth 10 million Rand in Umhlanga, sell your house and move into a more modest house and afford a lawyer, is the rationale there. When we've got our normal full staffing capacity, we have 3 attorneys. We're 1 short at the moment. an administrative officer, a legal secretary, and 4 candidate attorneys. But what about the next 50 years? What about the next director? I'll be long gone pushing up the daisies by then. But the next director who can raise their bat, having turned 100, what do I think could and should be done? Someone asked the question, quite prudent question, what does the law clinic do to market their services? And I think that's a real space for improvement in the law clinic. At the moment, we are working on improving our website. We do have posters and pamphlets, but we could do more and we will do more. But we need to continue to build on the solid foundations and grow, expand our services. With that comes greater funding. Colleagues, funding in the non-governmental sector is extremely pressurized. There are many calls for funding and limited funding available. And even if you meet all your deliverables, sometimes the funding dries up. Those funders that I mentioned to you, I see some nods in the gallery from those who obviously work in that field. Some of those funders I mentioned, I'm not aware of one of those funders who stopped funding because the law clinic didn't meet its deliverables. It simply came to the end of its sell-by date. Perhaps it was a 5-year contract, and that was it. So we need to seek greater and continued funding, more outreaches, and foster and embrace technological advances like online bookings and file systems. Ultimately, we'll seek new methods and processes which aim to improve clinical legal education and access to justice. If I can attempt to inspire those clinical law students who are here, other LLB students, law clinic staff, the more effort that you put in at the law clinic, and generally we had Mr. Mark Larkin inspiring you. He's doing some excellent pro bono work himself through his own practice earlier. The more effort that you put in, the more you will get out of it. And I don't just say that as empty words. I know that from experience. Thank you again for sharing this auspicious occasion with us. Thank you for staying on after the eats as well. I know it's very tempting then to head off, but I'm very grateful that you were here. And if I can now just hand over to Prof. David McCoy-Mason, who can, I'm sure, both give us some nice war stories and carry on where he left off earlier. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Dave, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm only going to take 15 minutes. I've asked Narissa to show me a 2-minute warning again, just in case it's been a long day. I did start telling you a little bit about 1973 when we started the clinic, but the environment then was 500,000 people a year were being arrested for not having passed their passes, these internal DOM passes that black people had to cover to hold to go into a city. So what we did was we made a little pamphlet booklet which they could put in their pocket together with their pass, which would tell them they can say to the police if they've left it at home, the police have got to give them an opportunity to go and fetch it and not just stick them in, because on a Friday they would arrest them and just keep them all on the weekend. So we managed to block that, and then at Wits, Mohammed Nafso became a judge later. They went to the pass courts and started defending every single pass law case. And that eventually clogged up the courts. So we managed to stop that by doing that sort of thing. But as I mentioned to you, I started it in 1973 after that legal aid conference. And unlike, as the director here has mentioned, funding, the dean said to me, you can do one if there's no funding involved. And so I did it really on a voluntary basis. I had the students divided into law firms. I would take each law firm for a seminar. They were all partners in a law firm. They would each be allocated files. We'd meet every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, a slot, and have a seminar on what the cases were so they could all give each other ideas as to how these cases could be solved. So we did that regularly. We also had the clinic. We didn't have full-time staff, so we opened on Friday afternoons, where there weren't many lectures, and Saturday mornings. Friday afternoon was at the clinic up here in Howard College, where the postgraduate office is now, and Saturday afternoons was down either at the Methodist Church Hall, down in Umbila, or at the Garment Union Workers' Hall as well. So we'd run the clinics there, and I had portable files. We'd take down portable filing cabinets and things. And it was very interesting because I mentioned I had a problem with the security police, and I was able to persuade them, look, the lawyers in the Law Society are supporting us, which they weren't to start off with, but afterwards they were. So it's not a communist plot. And then I had the Law Society sitting in on the management committee so that they could say we were being properly supervised. And they arranged a roster of their attorneys to come and supervise the students down, particularly when we were down at the Methodist Church Hall. And I remember on one occasion I had the president of the Law Society with me, and we walked into the hall and there was a sign saying workers' rights and employers' duties. And this person, president of the Law Society at that stage, pointed to the workers' one and said, "That is communism." So I said, "Okay, but that is capitalism," and pointed to the duties of the workers. Anyway, they realized then that we were doing proper supervision. And the early cases were quite interesting ones as well, because we weren't able to appear in court, but we would give letters that could be handed into court by the clients in person. They're doing a lot of that in England now, by the way, in-person representation. Law clinics are training people how to represent themselves, where there's been a relaxation in England regarding the legal profession. But here we would give them a letter. And just two interesting cases, one an amusing one, and one pointing to the sadness of apartheid, which gave us an ethical problem, but we had to act in the best interest of our client. First one was down in Bulwer Road. In the evenings at Bulwer Park has street lights, and I was a student in digs there, so I used to swat under those street lights on hot summer nights. Well, a student was doing the same thing there, and as he lay back on the grass, he got ants in his pants. So he stood up and pulled his pants down to try and get the ants out, just as a police van went past, and he was a black student, and the police van came and arrested him for public indecency. So we gave him a note carefully explaining to the magistrate and the prosecutor this is what happened, and they withdrew the charges against him. So that was an amusing case. A sad case was one where a whole lot, about 20 African mothers who had mixed-race colored kids. So they had kids either from white lovers or so-called colored lovers, and they came in and said, "Can we change the children's birth certificates from an African father to a colored or white father so that they can be classified as colored kids?" And they would then have the advantage over the black kids. And now we had this dilemma because we didn't believe in people being labeled, but we also had to think of the best interests of the child. And so the best interests of the child prevailed, and we actually had, in those days, you advertised a number of times in a government gazette. We did that, and we got all those kids' names changed eventually. So that was the sad effort, but also gave you a sort of conflict ethical duty, as well as a human rights conflicting value thing. What do we do? And as a lawyer, we act in the best interests of our clients, but also in the case of children, we act in the best interests of children. And when I was in the clinic, I devised a sort of handbook of things to do. And one of the things we gave students for, and I did this later on when I started teaching medical law as well, was to give them some ethical signposts, which are signposts about what they can do to guide them. And there are 4 ethical principles they can follow. The first one is client autonomy. Always recognize the ability of your client to make decisions. You give your client the option. You say, we can do this, and if we do this, this will happen, and this is what the result might be. If we do that, this will happen. So the client knows these are the options, these are the different things. You decide which one you want. So client autonomy, very important. The second one is non-maleficence. Never harm your client. Don't do things to harm your client. Even if you have to withdraw for good reason, you make sure your client is handed over to somebody else, and you do it in a way in the court that it doesn't prejudice the magistrate against your client. So, non-maleficence. The third one is beneficence. Always do good for your client. Do good things for your clients. And sometimes it is a good thing to get a client to plead guilty sometimes, but only if they've actually committed an offense. And then the last thing is always justice and fairness. Are you treating your clients fairly and justly? It doesn't matter that he or she's a poor homeless person off the street or a big shot politician or anybody else. You treat everybody as a client. So 4 principles: client autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, and fairness or justice. And if you follow those 4 principles, and I wrote a whole article how it fit in with all the ethical codes, the International Ethical Code of Ethics for lawyers, the British systems, it fits in with everybody's rules. If you follow those rules, you'll never get into trouble with the Law Society. You'll be in line with what the laws require you to do, and it's also in line with the Constitution. And you can look in our Constitution, and you can see client autonomy, the right to privacy, the right to dignity, all those things. You can see non-maleficence. Don't expose people to a harmful environment. Don't refuse emergency medical treatment. You've got that there. You've also got the beneficence there. You've got to do good for people as well. So you act positively for people in terms of the Bill of Rights. And justice or fairness, everybody is treated equally. So I always gave them that little lesson also. So the clinic then in 1973 was just a voluntary program. In those days we called it a legal aid clinic because Legal Aid South Africa was doing virtually nothing. They were mainly doing with white divorces and neglecting the larger African community. So 1973, 1978, the students said to me, "Prof, can't we get this made a credit course because we're doing all this hard work?" So I got them to motivate at the law board, and their representative motivated it, we supported it, and it became a credit course. And so after that then, it became very popular, and it was for the B Proc degree, and also as an option in the LLB B degree, where instead of the research project, you could actually submit a casebook on your legal aid cases and show the law you researched to solve the problem. So that was how we got it into the curriculum without having to change the whole structure and go through a whole lot of different things. And then that model, at the same time, it was adopted by Zimbabwe at the same period after that conference. And then the law clinics just started spreading across the campus. I had to persuade the Fidelity Fund to provide money for the clinics, because first of all, they thought, what has this got to do with improving the legal profession? And we said, because the students are going to get practical skills in a social environment, you need to start funding them. So by 1978 onwards, they started looking at that and started funding the clinics. And then at the same time, I was appointed much later to the Legal Aid Board by Dalla Omar, Minister of Justice. And what I did then was to push for law students. Well, first we had to get the Attorneys Act changed, which we changed in 1993, so that students could do articles in not only in law firms, but could do in the Legal Resources Centre, law clinics, and so on as well. And then also we had the clinics around the country then were able to come on board for that. I was also then a little bit later, this is now moving into the 90s, somebody here was our director for the clinic, Usher Gobbin, and Ford Foundation, you mentioned foundations, Ford came and they were helping money for historically black universities, but they wanted to give us, by 1996 or 97, they wanted to give us what I call a kiss-off grant, a grant to say, we're leaving South Africa, you guys have got democracy, we're not interested, but we'll give you $1 million, you invest this for 5 years and use that to support law clinics in the country. So I then went with Usher, saw Dalla Omar set up the Ally Trust, the Association of Legal Aid Institutions Trust, which now, of course, is SOLCA, as was mentioned earlier by Dave. 2 minutes, okay, thanks. So we set up that trust, and then Carthy was made chair, Carthy Governor, not with us today, unfortunately. And Carthy, we're very careful about keeping our running costs very low. And that 5 million, that 1 million has now been invested and is still going now, which is many years later. The Ally Trust still exists. We've still got money invested. And what it started to do was to start attracting other funders, the ones you mentioned, Mott and those guys. Because what the Ally Trust did was give the law clinics training in how to support clusters of community advice officers. So each clinic has 10 or more advice officers, and we train them in how to do that, how to support them. And then funders like Mott come along and say, okay, well, you're a reliable source. Will you then arrange for the funding? And so we were the channel for the funding for those clinics as well. And we do workshops and all sorts of things. It also, our experiences here and with my international travel after 1990, 1996 in Kenya, I was elected as president of the Commonwealth Legal Education Association, which is 3,000 law schools around the Commonwealth. And I tried to get rid of this. They kept me on. Nobody wanted to vote me off. Eventually, last year, I went to India, said, guys, I insist. They said, okay, on one condition, we're making you emeritus president, so you've still got to attend meetings. But my good colleague, Siva Kumar, is very dynamic, has taken over. And then I also helped with the establishment of GAGE, which is the Global Alliance for Justice Education. And we managed to get them, we hosted the second 1999 Justice GAGE conference here. And it was the only conference that ever made money because we got so much sponsorship for all the activities on the campus that the fees, and we charged the developing countries more than the developed countries, we got enough money in the pot to show a profit, and that money is still a little bit sitting in the trust account of Allied Trust. It's down to about 12,000 Rand or something, but it's still there. Anyway, I think my 2 minutes is up. I can tell you many war stories. I'm not going to tell you many more. Dave, good luck with the next 50 years. Thanks. Thanks very much.
McQuaid Mason, Dr. Holness, Prof. Kidd, all the guests that are here this afternoon, and the law clinic staff. So I have heard wonderful things about what you do every day. You continue to be an inspiration to us. You're the interface between students and also the clients that come to see you, sometimes in the most dire situations in their life. and often they walk out of there empowered. So we are immensely grateful for your efforts, the efforts of those that have gone before you, which includes many people that are still in the room this evening, Tandeka, Rashen, Prof. McQuaid-Mason being the bedrock for the clinic as well, and then Eben van der Merwe, inimitable Eben van der Merwe. So with all of that, Siyabonga Kakhulu, thank you so much, have a lovely evening, and Halala Law Clinic, UKZN, may you live ever long. Thank you.